Arrin Sutliff creates site-specific and time-based work using plants, flowers, and digital media. Based in DC, Arrin is the owner of Tint Floral, which focuses on both teaching and large-scale installations. Informed by the season, she relies on local growers and nurseries for blooms and foliage. Over to you, Arrin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to fall. Even though in DC today it's 78 degrees, so it feels like a weird day to be working with fall leaves. But I'm going to give you two demonstrations today. One, a little more like contained wreath with just all leaves. And the reason I want to do this one is because I think all of you can find this on your street, in your backyard. You can definitely find some deciduous trees that are about to lose all of their leaves, and you can kind of snatch some before they do that. And then the other one I'm going to do is going to be more focused on native plants, and it's going to be a little more wild and a little bit bigger. And so you'll kind of see too, and feel free to just take this technique. These techniques are always applicable to all sorts of plant materials, so don't feel like if you can't get this certain type of holly or this certain type of leaf that you're not going to be able to do it. It's really just learning these wire techniques, and you can use it to work with any plant material that you have. So I want to start off with just some materials that I'll be using today. I have 2 pair of clippers. Really, any clippers will work. I tend to really like pruners because they have this scoop and it helps for thicker branches. And so these are the ARS pruners. And if you have regular clippers like this, like these are the Joyce Chen, these are actually kitchen shears, but if you have things like this, or even if you have just other flower snips, you may damage your scissors or your snips if you try to cut a thick branch with them. So that's why I really like when you have this little scoop, it tends to cut thicker branches better. So these are the ARS pruners. I really like them because they're just light in your hand, opposed to some clippers that tend to be really heavy. But if you're just making one wreath, definitely just use what you have. Like I said, even regular scissors can work as long as you can somehow get that branch down. And like once you get it, it's really easy to just use small clippers to kind of break things down. So these are smaller ones. The reason I have a smaller pair and a larger pair here today is because for me, it's just a lot easier to do teeny work with small clippers. And so when I'm taking off, like for this wreath, for example, when I'm taking off these leaves, I can just come in here and like really finely with these small points, I can clip off the leaves. It's a little bit clunkier with this, but it would still totally work. So another thing I have are a couple bases. So this is just, I think if you tried to search for this online or something, it would just be called a flower hoop or a floral hoop. And I think this one is 12 inches. Usually I try to get 10 or 12 inches. That just seems to be a good size for just like your standard size door. And so that's what I have here today. It's a really simple ring, but some other things that you can use are, this one is made out of bittersweet. And so any like viney type thing that is pliable, you can just wind up into a wreath frame. Honestly, anything that is circular, you really don't even have to have it be circular, but anything like I would say traditional wreath, like when you think of a wreath, you think of a circle. And so anything that's circular that you can add wire onto, you can use as a base, as long as it like is structured. So some things that I've used before are bike tire rims. I mean, they're going to be huge unless it's like a kid's bike. So it might be a little big for your door, but let's say you have a restaurant or you want to put like a huge wreath on the side of your house or something. Those big tire rims are awesome and they work really well for that. If you go to any bike store, a lot of times they just have rims that are broken, like that came off of an old bike just lying around. So that's a really good to make do with something that is otherwise going to go into a landfill, and you can get like a really giant wreath. Some other things, I don't have any wire hangers right now, but if you know those wire, like just a regular hook and then it kind of goes out into a triangle, those wire hangers, if you just take that and kind of like pull the bottom of the triangle down, you can just make that into a circle. You might have to finagle it a little bit. And then the top will have a little hook so that you can hang your wreath. It already has like this hook mechanism. So that's a really good thing to use. Like I bet you have something in your house that will work as a wreath frame, even if you don't think that you do. So those are some ideas for frames. I'm using 2 types of wire today. So they're both regular, it's just floral wire. And one I have on a spool. I tend to really like the spool versus the paddle, but that's only because I've like, there have been seasons where I've just been making like tons of wreaths every day from fall till Christmas. And so what happens with the spool is it just like glides in your hand way better. You can turn it way better. Whereas with the paddle, you kind of have to like flip it every time. And this is not hard at all. I think more commonly you see the paddle. Like I mentioned before, if you're just making 1 wreath or 2 wreaths or even 10 wreaths, the paddle is great. When you're starting to make like tons of wreaths, that the little bit of time that you save with the spool, how it kind of just like flows open in your hand, will actually save you time. And to me, it's worth it. It's a little bit more efficient. So in terms of gauge, this one's 23 gauge. So with any type of floral wire, the lower the number, the thicker the wire. So this one that I have here is, I think it's a 28. Yeah, so I have a 28 and a 23. I would say it's kind of interesting that I have these ones. I would say the one that I use most commonly is just 26. And I think the reason, like when I'm buying like a big box of wire for workshops or whatnot, 26 just seems to work for everything. So if you just want to get one that kind of works for all things that you can use for wire, which like you can use them to make garland, you can use wire to make flower crowns, you can use wire to make wreaths. Like if you really want your wire to be the most versatile, 26 seems to be like the sweet spot. Because I had a couple in other ranges, I'm going to be using them today because this lighter one is nice with this, like these really light leaves, but the 26 would totally work. And this heavier one, the 28, is going to be nice for some of the thicker, branchier stuff that I'm going to make with the second wreath. And again, like the 26 really would have just worked with both of these. So as Emily said, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and about materials or anything throughout, and she will relay those to me, and I can answer any questions that you might have about materials, technique, etc.
Hey, Arrin, could you talk a little bit about any technique you used for creating that frame that's made out of plant material? If people want to do that, are there features of the plants that you should look for, or anything like that that you would suggest?
Yeah, so usually I just look for things that are kind of viney or like young growth. Anything that's like kind of younger growth, it's a little bit more pliable. So I actually have bittersweet is great because I'll talk about bittersweet first. So bittersweet is awesome because it is invasive. And so I actually there's a friend's farm that I go to collect bittersweet. And it actually kind of sometimes suffocates their juniper trees and other stuff because it kind of just wraps itself around. So I'm kind of doing them a favor by ripping the bittersweet out and kind of cleaning up. The one thing that you want to consider when you are using invasive plants, and this is going to be different for all areas, so definitely like check what's invasive in your area and if there are tips of how to dispose of it and whatnot. This comes with berries on it. Originally, like these either yellow or red, they kind of like crack open, so they're different colors depending on when you harvest them. But you don't want to, like when I collect this vine, I try to put it in a bag instead of just like carrying all the vine freely, because if all the berries just fall off, I'm basically allowing it to like reproduce in many other areas. So just want to mention that about bittersweet. While bittersweet is like an awesome thing to forage for in the fall, you don't want to just spread those berries all over when it's an invasive plant. But to give you an example, so this is willow branch, and this is actually really soft growth. You'll be able to kind of like when you're in your yard or at your friend's farm or wherever you might be collecting this stuff, you'll be able to kind of feel if it's pliable. If it's dry, it's just gonna snap. And so you'll kind of notice what's pliable and see how I can kind of just bend this into a circle. Like that's what you want to look for. If it's just snapping right away, it's not going to work. So a lot of times like wild grapevine, that's a great one. Bittersweet's great. Willow can be great. Depending on how much rain you've gotten in the season as well. Like sometimes I'll find grapevine that just snaps because it's just been a really dry year. Maybe it's not as wet. Maybe it's not as pliable. Something that you can do if you're looking around and like nothing that you're looking for is bendy enough, everything just keeps snapping, you can soak it in a bucket of water or in a bathtub and kind of get it wet and soak it overnight or for a couple days, and it might become more pliable. You're not going to turn something like this is a stem of white oak. You're not going to turn something like as stiff as this. Like if I soaked this, it doesn't matter. Like it's still just not going to bend. It's still going to snap just because of the nature of the stem. So it has to be like that viney type stem to begin with. But I do know a lot of people who like soak a bunch of grapevine that tended to be really dry in their bathtub or something, and then it becomes really pliable, and then they can make like baskets with it or wreath bases with it. So how you would do it is it's pretty simple. I don't have a ton of bittersweet here to show you, but you basically just work it in on itself. And you kind of form this circle. This down here is it's a little thick, so I can see, yeah, this probably is gonna snap on me because it's a little thicker. What you can do to try to keep it from snapping is, like I said, this might just snap anyway. It's thick down here, but I'm going to try to see how much I can get out of it. But you can put your thumbs underneath here. I'll show you in the top-down camera so you can see a little bit better. So I'm putting my thumbs under here, and then I'm bending, and that way, like, it's going to help it from snapping there a little bit. I mean, ideally, it's just, see how like this part's just way more pliable? I'd probably just cut it here and just get rid of this because it's a little too stiff. But you kind of just bend this in on itself. And then just wrap it around. Usually I don't use any wire or anything to do it. As you can see, like I didn't use any wire here. Get this out of the way so you can see what it looks like. So at the start, it might not look like a perfect circle, but as you go, you kind of work it into a perfect circle as you add things. And so you don't need to add a ton, but a few branches, you get it worked in, and you just keep wrapping it in on itself and see how it would come undone if I didn't, like it would just come undone if I didn't wrap that there. So you really just want to kind of wrap this in. It's kind of like an intuitive type thing, and you can kind of bend it into shape. Even these, I can wrap these into. I'll probably lose their leaves, but. So you start with something like that, and then you keep adding branches, and you end up with a base like this. This one I actually did last year, so it's very dry right now, so it's not going to, if I tried to bend this now, it would just snap. But that's the general method.
Thanks, Arrin. We had a question too. You mentioned that you had foraged for that bittersweet at a friend's farm. So we had a question about, do you have any tips for ethical and legal foraging? And especially if you are a person who does not have your own yard, maybe you live in DC and you don't have a spot that's your own place to forage. What would you suggest to people?
I mean, so definitely like talk to your neighbors and stuff, because a lot of people have like even the stop sign on your street might just be like flooded with vines around it. So, or the alley might have a lot of things around it. I always ask people, because a lot of times someone will just have like ivy kind of growing up their house and it's kind of getting out of control. And they really don't care at all if you cut a few stems like of the viney stuff anyway. In terms of national parks and like land that is not yours, you definitely just have to look in your area. There's actually a good podcast on this. So it's called the Flower Podcast. So pretty easy to remember. And the guest that talked about this in depth, which like I just feel like it would be good to listen to. I think her name was Carly. I hope I'm getting that right. But if you just search like the Flower Podcast foraging, there was an episode all on foraging, and she talked specifically about the rules in her area and how she found out about those. So, because it really is specific, it really just depends. Like certain places are fine with you getting the invasive stuff. Some places like you can't take anything. So I don't have a super clear answer. I would say, I know you said you don't have a yard, but the best thing is just like seeing what's right on your block and then kind of talking to the people like in DC about what's there, because a lot of times you can find stuff that you've kind of walked by every single day and you never thought was great. If you kind of just open your eyes and have a little bit of a different lens, you'll start to notice that there might be more around you than you think.
Thanks, Arrin. And then we just had a comment that somebody really enjoyed getting to see that process of how you made that frame. They'd always wondered about that. So thanks for showing us. Yeah,
it's like really cool, especially if you can just do it outside. Like it's actually a lot easier to do it outside, because if you're especially if you're making a lot of them, if I go to my friends and I just like collect all this bittersweet and I try to put it in my car, it's like really wild, and like vines are just crazy, so they're just kind of going all over the place. So usually I just kind of like wrap them up while I'm out there, because it keeps it really clean. I can just kind of like stick a bunch of them on my arm, and you can kind of get a lot of bases like pretty quickly. Also, I'm going to be using wire today, but just because I think especially for beginners it's just easier. But if you start to get really confident with this motion that I'm going to show you with how to wire things, you can make these with twine. It takes a little more practice, like a little more skillful of a hand. But if you made them with twine, the awesome thing about this is you can just toss this in the woods after, or in the compost pile after, because it doesn't have wire. So a huge proponent of just leaving the wire out of it if you can down the road. The wire makes it really, really easy. So I don't want to like not give you guys like, I would say, what is the best tool for wreath making. But if you start to feel confident with it, do consider twine or something that is biodegradable. Okay, so I'm going to start with this. I will say, so I don't know if it was for the Botanic Gardens, but I have taught classes before. If you've taken any of my classes, sometimes I put tape on these like metal slippery frames, stem tape, which if you're familiar with stem tape, it's like this papery tape where when you stretch it, it gets sticky. Sometimes like things want to slip off of these really tiny frames. So I'll do that. For this one, I'm not going to, just because I'm going to make sure that every time I wrap with the wire, I'm just going to pull snug. And you'll notice too that my spool of wire is always close to the frame. So what I see a lot of people doing in classes who've never done this before, they get way out here. Like their wire somehow gets way out here and it gets away from you. And it's a lot harder to get like a good grip on the plant material when your wire gets away from you. So try to reel it in and try to not have your wire get farther than this away, and it's going to be like so much more enjoyable of a process if you can just keep it tight. So the way I would start this, I already got this one going, so I'll show you on the grapevine how I would get this started. So the premise is you get a bunch of, when I say a bunch, I'm talking like you create like a little bundle of plant material. You stick it on the wreath, and then you wrap around 3 times with the wire to make it stay. But if I tried to hold this plant material in place and tried to like get this wire, it's just, there's a lot going on in the beginning to try to do that, and it's kind of hard. So before you even start, just leave the plant material for this to the side for a second, and before you do anything, just get your wire connected to the frame. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm just slipping it under any one of these little branches, and then I'm just going to twist it. There's no rhyme or reason to this. People do it differently. I usually just twist it around a couple times, and then I kind of tug on it, and I'm like, okay, yep, this isn't going anywhere. So, so you get your wire on, and then that's when you can take your plant material. You can take the bundles you create, whether they are with leaves or they are with the larger branches that I'll show you in a second. And you basically just go around one. And see how like each time I end here, I don't just go around again. I like pull. I really make it snug there. So that's 2. And then I'm going around a 3rd time, and still that 3rd time, I'm really snugging before I drop it. And then you take your next bunch and you continue to go all the way around the wreath. So to finish that other one, I'll bring this back. So you now know how I got that started. One thing that I really like to do, if you're doing, this is like a great thing to do with friends. It's like an awesome activity to do with family or friends. And one thing I really like to do is to prep all my material before I start going. So see how I have this basket of leaves here? Like I've already prepped the material for this. And what I mean by prep, I've just broken it down. So all I've done is I take, I'll show you one of these branches. Take one of these branches, and I'm just cutting these leaves. And the reason that I'm stressing to prep your material is because it's really frustrating when, like, for me, it's just not an enjoyable process when you're putting on stems and then you have to stop, you have to cut material, and then you have to come back. It's just like not a good flow. It doesn't feel as good. Whereas if you just cut all your leaves in the beginning and it's just all ready for you and you just have this nice basket and you're ready to go, you can make really easy bundles and you can just kind of like get in this flow and do this rhythmic motion. And it'll feel a little bit better on your hand if you have all your stuff prepped. So I'm basically just creating these little bundles. And I'll let you know how many stems are in here, but really, like, while I do think it's important to wrap around 3 times to have it feel secure, I don't think the number of leaves in this is super important. This is kind of just a matter of preference. But in this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 6 in this one. I'll add a 7th just because it's in my hand. But you can see, so I have my ends here where I stopped, and you're basically just covering up your previous work. So you put it here. I never take my wire off, so you don't have to keep cutting and attaching. You just leave the spool on the whole time. Getting it in here so that I have full control, and then I'm wrapping once, pulling it snug, wrapping twice, pulling it snug, wrapping 3 times, pulling it snug. You can probably get away, honestly, with wrapping it like twice. I just feel like the 3 times for me, it's just always like I never had to worry about any plant material falling out. It always just feels like the perfect amount of secure. But play around with it. If you want to wrap it 4 times because you feel like you're not getting a good grip on the wire, that's fine. It's pretty thin, so it's not like it's going to make things bulky. So I'm going to do this again. Notice that where my hands are, like where I'm creating this bundle, it's really thin. So I I'm not getting the leaf part down into my hand. So the part where I'm creating the bundle, I'm just creating this like little leaf bouquet in my hand essentially. I'm not even really thinking too much about color because all these like fall leaves just go so well together, but you can certainly like get creative with it. Like if I really wanted to, I could have put like the white oak, which is a little more brown, into the maple, and then maybe into tulip poplar, and it could have kind of been this like kind of like an ombre effect. So you could definitely get creative with it.
Arrin, we have a few people curious about color and leaves when you're working on a wreath like this. How long does the color last?
I think it just depends on where you store it. Like, depends on how dry it is, if it's going to dry up. Like, it also depends on the leaves. Like, I have some leaves from like 2 weeks ago that are in here from something I made, and they're still like quite yellow. So I think there are a lot of factors that go into when they were harvested, how much color was left in them. So it's a hard answer. I think it's just something like these are pretty quick to make. So like it's not something like an evergreen wreath that you can make in December and like it's gonna last you until basically February because your outside is essentially like a cooler for these evergreen wreaths because it's winter. So these definitely don't last quite as long, but play around with it. And then also like one thing I do like to do to refresh these. So there is a class that I think Elizabeth put in the chat or someone sent it. You got an email with the link to a previous class I did about like how to refresh a wreath. So one thing you can do, like let's say it just starts to get brown, like certain stems like lose its color and it's kind of getting crunchy and it doesn't really feel as like uplifting as it once did. You can definitely just like get a few more leaves from outside and just stick them in. Like once you create this base, let me try to show you an example. So once you create this base, a lot of times you can just kind of like stick things into it and it'll stay. And so if you watch that class, you can see some methods on how I do that. Like sometimes I kind of cut the stem on an angle so it has more of like a piercing effect. So it kind of like really gets in there well. But that's definitely something you can do if you feel like it's starting to get brown and kind of dingy looking and you want to bring it back to life.
Thanks, Arrin. And yes, Elizabeth did share that link in the chat. We have a question. Is there anything you ever do like before constructing the wreath to preserve the leaves?
I personally don't, just because like I just kind of take things as they go. I just kind of for this, it's different if I'm doing like, I really take care of like boutonnieres, if I'm doing a boutonniere for a wedding, or if I'm doing a wrist corsage for a wedding, if I'm doing stuff like that, I'm really concerned about it lasting for like a certain amount of time, for like the length of an event, out of water, things like that. When it comes to wreaths, it's more of like, I'm trying to emulate the season. And so I kind of just let it do what it does. I'm sure there are things like, I know there's that powder. Because I'm like just not big into this, I can't give you a ton of specific information, but I know there's this powder that it's like a silica gel maybe, but it's in a powder form. And you can actually, if you use that to preserve it, they will actually retain their color and everything. So that can be a cool thing to look into. If you're working with evergreens, what you can do is like, because they're not already like dried out, and like you can actually soak them in water and you can continue to spray the wreath so it's like so it doesn't get dry as quickly. But for these leaves, like usually I just kind of let them be. But I'm sure if you look online, like you'll find people who are trying to get the most longevity out of them. I'm like not a big fan of this bright green in here, so.
Thanks. Yeah, somebody asked about that misting process and if you thought misting the leaves regularly might help keep the color and make it last longer.
I mean, maybe some of them are just too dry. Like these white oak ones, I just feel like they're already, it doesn't feel like there's any life in them. So I feel like misting something that's so dry already isn't going to work. In terms of these other ones, I think it definitely could work, because really, like, you're just fighting, you're trying to have it dry out less quickly. Like if you put this over a fireplace and you have your fireplace on all the time, it's going to it's going to dry out super quickly, and it's definitely going to go bad quicker than if you have it on your door and it's kind of like humid outside. So I think based on that logic, like if you do spritz it, the color definitely should last longer. I wish I had experience in this. I kind of just like, I'm going slow right now because I'm kind of just showing you, but you can really, once you get this motion down, you can like whip one of these up really quickly. So before I was kind of like, I will say, let me grab stem tape because I just want to show you something. If you're doing this with kids or something and you feel like this is just a little too hard for them to do all at once, a technique that you can use, give me 1 second. I just thought of this. A technique that you can use to make it a little more accessible is you can always take, this is the stem tape that I was talking about, where to touch it, it's called floral stem tape. To touch it, it's like very dry, but then when you stretch it, it becomes sticky and it kind of like sticks to itself. So something that you can do is pre-make these bundles. So you can add these. So I'll get my like roughly 6 stems. And this is definitely like, this is a whole additional step, so it's going to take longer. But if you feel like it's really hard for you to hold on to this and hold on to the wire in the beginning, it might just be better to make these little bundles. And so I'm basically just taking this stem tape and I'm stretching the tape as I go around so it sticks to itself. And so I could, as an alternative, just make a bunch of these little bundles and then put them on down the line. And that might be great if you're working with someone that's just like struggling with kind of, because with this method, you do have to hold the bundle together, hold it onto the frame and wire at the same time, which I have all the confidence in the world in you, and I really think you can do it. But if you're just having trouble getting that wiring situation down, making these like little bundles first will be helpful. And I do want to say, in terms of something that is also something you should consider is like, you can do the same exact method with garland. So I know we're not like really thinking about garland quite yet with like Thanksgiving is next and Christmas is a little bit down the line. But if you do want to make garland, it's the same method, but instead of using like this circular frame, you're basically using like a linear frame. So you can use like a piece of twine, and then you can like just wire all these little bundles that you create to the twine. Or if you feel like the twine is just like too loose, like if you're kind of new to it and you just feel like it's tough for you to work on something that isn't rigid, which tends to happen. Like it can be a little more difficult if your frame isn't rigid. You can just use like a long, thin wire, or like something that's a little more rigid down, that you would put down the table, and it would be the same exact method. You would just be doing it on a different style, like frame, like a linear frame instead.
Thanks, Arrin. Yeah, we had a question. Somebody was asking about making evergreen wreaths. Would you use similar technique to do that?
Same exact thing. So the next wreath that I'm going to show you, which I'm going to start here in a second, I'm not going to make you watch me go through this entire thing. I think you get the idea with how you would do this. So I am going to move on to the next one, but you can do this all the way around. The nice thing about these frames that do look nice, I mean, I don't personally think this style of wreath, like I would definitely need to add more, or at least like taper it down here or taper it down here for this to look good. To me, it just like, it looks like it's not finished right now. Like I would love to go all the way around. But the nice thing about these frames that You're not concerned, like if you did a bike tire, for example, like a bike rim, you'd want to cover the whole thing up because it's gonna kind of look unsightly underneath. Whereas these ones, like you could do 3/4. Like I said, I would probably taper the top down and taper this part down if I were only doing 3/4. But if you're just like, maybe you're just over it, like it's nice to be able to use these because they can be seen and they still look really nice and they can be just like a little bit more minimal. So I'll set this aside for now. Same goes for these grapevine. Like I could leave part of this totally visible and it looks fine. Like I could, it doesn't, the whole thing does not need to be covered. I usually cover the whole thing, but it kind of just depends on the mood I'm in. So I've already started this. I'm gonna take these leaves out because this is just not the direction that I'm going for this one. I'm going to be using more of like the native plants. This is a little more similar to how it's the same method for the evergreen wreath, but as the leaves, you'll just see how the stems are a little bit longer. So you're doing the same thing where you're like making these bundles and you're adding them in succession as you go around. This one's just like a little more wild. And so you can definitely do this with arborvitae, juniper. I actually have some juniper here. This is a holly variety. I have another holly variety. Actually, I'll show you the plants I'm going to use first. So I mean, a lot of what I'm using, like the juniper and this variety of holly, are evergreen. So it would be this. You would do it the same exact way. So these two are ilex / holly varieties. And then you saw the willow. I did this willow, but I might actually use a couple of these side branches that were on the willow in this wreath. Okay, this one is Fothergilla, which is a really, really nice, pretty leaf. I got this one because I had some red berries, so I just thought this leaf would go really well with it. I have some juniper, and so usually while I try to get juniper with the berries on it because I just think it looks so pretty. More so for winter wreaths though, for this fall wreath, because I want it to be like a little warmer. Like when you think of fall colors, you think of oranges and reds and yellows, and I didn't really want it to have like the cool blue. I just didn't think it went. So I actually tried to cut some branches without any berries. So this is the juniper. I have some native honeysuckle, which the flower fell off, I think, of the one. You guys should look up the native honeysuckle to this area because it's gorgeous. So the honeysuckle that you may see a lot of, which I'm pretty sure is invasive, is like the yellow and white one. It's really common. I feel like everyone has a story with honeysuckle as a kid. The native one, which a lot of people don't grow, and I feel like they should, has this beautiful like red trumpet. It's like a kind of like a reddish, orangish like trumpet flower on it. It's really gorgeous. So definitely look that flower up so you can see it. But this is the honeysuckle vine, so I might use some of this. I really love how wild it is. Here's another piece of the honeysuckle that does have, looks like some seed pods on it. The flower is gone, but if you're trying to identify it, that could be a little bit more helpful than just the leaves. Let's see. I have one more. So this is blue stem, some native grasses, big blue stem and little blue stem. And I do like to have some grasses if I can, like as some things that are soft. Talking about spraying things, like if I made a wreath of all grasses, like spraying it, these are already kind of just dried out. I don't think it's gonna do much, whereas like spraying something that has a bunch of evergreen in it will prevent it from drying out as fast. I mean, a bunch of like juniper or cedar or things that could dry out and kind of just start to crinkle over time. The misting would definitely help with this. Oh, and then this one that is, okay. Lakothoe, which you should look up. Hope maybe someone will put it in the chat how to spell this, but it's a funny one to say. It's spelled like with an OE at the end, which I just feel like is uncommon to say, like Lakothoe, but it's cool. I really like this one too. I think that's all I have. Is there anything else? We have a holly this time. Okay, yeah, so I'll get going. So for this one, I didn't really break down, and you'll see like why it's nice to kind of break these stems down before, because it's just a much faster process. But I just kind of wanted to show you how I would break these big branchy things down. So I haven't broken them down yet. So this is just this big branch. And so usually I would just cut them down into more manageable pieces, anywhere from like, I don't know, this is probably what, 12? This is probably 12 inches. I would say anywhere from like 4 to 12 inch pieces. It just depends on how wild you want it to be. So our leaves were probably, our leaves were tiny. These are maybe 3 inches. So if you want something that resembles the size of the wreath, the leaf wreath that we were just working on, then maybe cut your pieces like 3-inch pieces. But if you want something that is a little more wild and a little more branchy, like kind of goes out, then maybe cut your pieces a little bit longer. So there's no like rhyme or there's no rule of how long to cut your pieces. It really just depends on how big you want your wreaths to be. And this one I'm gonna go for like a little bit wild. So my stem is on. I'm going to create this little bundle. I'm just creating it right on here. Like I said, with the stem tape, if this is easier for you to create these bundles beforehand, go for it. I'm going around, and I'm going to do 1, 2, 3 times. So now I'm going to take some juniper, and I'm just going to kind of layer this one with all sorts of plant material. Like you could do like all juniper here and all the holly down here. I'm gonna kind of do like a mixed bouquet style wreath for this one. So making this little juniper bundle in my hand. And kind of like when you're arranging flowers, like you can put it on here and see if you like it. Like if you don't like it, you can do something different. You're not tied to it. So you can kind of like give it a test run before you go ahead and wire it down. All right, so let's get some of this. Every time, I have to look at the paper every time. Lakothoe. I think I'm going to get some of this Father Gorilla in here as well to give it some color. And again, like how I mentioned, oh, this is a little excessive for right now. Maybe I'll add some color at the end. So how I mentioned how you can kind of like tuck things in at the end, once you kind of get a framework going, I can always come in at the end and like stick some pieces in. You're not totally tied down to this original thing, because once you create this network of stems, you can kind of easily jam things into it and they'll stay in place. So I might actually wait to kind of design with the color at the end, just because this feels like a little much for right now. This is a really long stem. It's not even in frame. This is a really long stem, but I like how it looks. I like how it's a little wild, so I'm going to go with that. I didn't mention this, but when I cut this Lakothoe, see how it has a blunt end right here? And that doesn't look like super awesome. It's okay. But like, see if I just cut randomly and right here you have this blunt end. And if I added this to a wreath, it's just not going to look that great. But what you can do is you can kind of like get in here and make sure I get this angle right on camera. So you can kind of cut this at an angle. I'll do it with these because they're a little finer snips. If you cut that at an angle, see how like now you can't really tell you have this blunt stem anymore? So you can get a lot more out of a stem. I'm actually going to do it a little lower because this leaf is not the most beautiful. But see how now I can get this whole, I can make use of this entire bottom half of the stem, where before it just kind of looked bad because it had this big blunt cut on it. Emily, feel free to ask any questions that are in the chat if there are any. And I'm just going to keep on making.
Thanks, Arrin. We had one asking, would the wreath last longer if you had it outside? Does sort of where you place it have any bearing on that?
Yeah, where you place it definitely does. Because if it's in like full sun, it's definitely going to just dry out quicker. So usually when we're talking, like I said, with these with the leaf wreath, it's a little different. I just kind of don't expect them to, I kind of just like let them do as they please. With these ones, because I know I can get a little more life out of them, I am a little more diligent about where I place them. Like if you have it inside, for example, like the misting would be great. If you put it on a front door that's north facing, then you're probably fine. Or if you put it on a door that's south facing, but it's under an awning, you're fine. If you put it on a door that's south facing and it's not under an awning, it may just get like cooked right away. It depends though, because if the weather cools down a little bit, like I mentioned with the outside kind of acting like a cooler, if it's cool, it will last a lot longer. So it's kind of the same with flower arrangements. Like if you keep your flower arrangement in the hottest room and the sunniest room, it's just not going to last as long. And if you put it in the coolest room, then you'll get a couple more days out of it. I just want to say, so as you can see, I just added one stem there and I twisted. So before I was kind of making these bundles. I usually make the bundles just because it's like it's a quicker way to design. But sometimes if I really know, like I just want this stem, like I really wanted this to go right here. So I just put one stem on and wrapped it, and that's fine. So like there's not a rule of how many stems you have to put on at one time. You can do one stem at a time or a few stems at a time. It's really up to you. I'm going to do this one kind of in the back. And when I'm adding grasses, I do like to bundle them. I'm not that strict about other things being bundled, but like I just think grasses, when you see grasses, you always see them in clumps. Like you see like a group of grasses and they're kind of growing. And so I always feel like it just kind of looks better to honor that. You can see like this is the same exact method, but we're getting a drastically different result. So with this wire, just use your creativity and I think some more juniper would be nice. Again, with this juniper, I have this big piece of juniper and I'm just going to break it down. I'm not worried about only using the tip because if I cut it in here you can't even tell. Like I'm not cutting it randomly so you have a big blunt end on the end. I'm cutting it at an angle right where there's a joint. And then I could get a few more pieces out of it. I'm very much kind of like designing this one where it's kind of like a flower arrangement where I'm being selective in where I put things. I'm kind of placing it, seeing if I like the color, the way it's blending in and going with it. But if you feel like intimidated by that, you can really you can kind of similar to how we did the leaf one, you can just be a little more methodical about it. You can take like one stem of juniper, one stem of, here, I'll give you an example. Like you can take one small stem of holly, one stem of juniper, one stem of the other type of holly, and I'm just saying the ones that I have, but this is like whatever plant materials you have. Did I use up all my Lacoste? Look, here I go again. Lacoste. So I can just make little bundles with like a single stem of everything that I have and then add it. And you can go around that entire way like that. You can just make these even bundles where each bundle has like one stem of each plant material that you have.
Arrin, we had an interesting question a little bit earlier, and you mentioned sort of thinking about in terms of floral arranging. Are there any plants that you use for a fall wreath that have like a special meaning or significance? Like sometimes certain types of flowers have special meanings.
Personally, I don't know. I don't know of any for fall, but that's just because I don't. There's like, I have a book that actually is like a bunch of flowers and their meanings. And so I know if I just spent like 5 minutes with that book, I could come back and give you tons of answers. So it exists. I'm just not knowledgeable in that area.
Yeah, thanks. It'd be interesting to learn, wouldn't it?
All right, I have a lot in this bin over here. I'm trying to figure out what to. And as you can see with the leaf one, like I could do this whole thing with just juniper and it would be just as beautiful. It would just be different. So if you would just have this one tree in your yard and you're like, well, I don't really have much to work with, just cut a few stems and see, because sometimes it'll surprise you. I really do pass things all the time. And I just never, you never think they're great because they're right in your like front box, or what if you're in the city and they just don't really look that appealing. Once you cut them and you kind of work them into a design, a lot of times they end up being really nice. These ilex berries so there's a type of ilex called Ilex verticulata, which I don't have today, but they're these really nice, like the berries are a lot harder. These ones are very squishy, so I have like everything. I have all these berries just kind of like squishing around me. So, I mean, it's fun to use, but I'm wondering how these berries will hold up. Another nice thing about you using the stuff that's like right around you in your yard or like in your community, with permission, of course, is that you really do get to learn these things, because all plant material behaves so differently. Like a lot of you asked about how to preserve this, and because everything's so differently, it'll be nice for you to kind of like learn about the things that are specific to your area. So I'm going to end this off, mostly due to time. I could go all the way around, but I do want to show you how to end it off. So I could leave this there and it's totally fine. I might go in later and finish it, but I'm not sure, maybe not. But the way you would end it is like you have to go in the opposite direction to kind of like cap this off, because otherwise you have these stem ends and the wire. So to finish it off, you just take one stem or one bundle. Usually I take a bundle, but this is like this holly is so branchy that I'm just going to use one stem. And you kind of go in the opposite direction. See how I kind of like covered up that exposed end? And then you you just kind of wrap your wire around as to not crush. It's like the most finicky part at the end because you can't just wrap or you'll just crush that stem. So you kind of have to like go around the stems and like weave them in. And if you have any bare spots, you can always like do the thing where I said after, oh, I didn't bring my wire cutters over here. Definitely don't use your clippers to cut wire. Certainly use wire cutters. They will damage your clippers. So I'll kind of just like twist this off in the back now. And then as I said, so I could come in here and I can just add in a few of those colorful leaves. I can kind of like stick them in. If I wanted to, I could finish the whole circle if I wanted to, but you can still, you're not tied to this as your final design when you're done. Because you've created this like network of stems, you can certainly continue to add things. Any final questions? Thank you guys for joining me today. If you have any more questions that like you didn't get out or you try this and you're really confused at something, like I think you probably have my information, my email or my website or something. So feel free to reach out if you had any issues. But yeah, Emily, any more questions in the chat that I could answer?
We had lots of just complimentary, think it's beautiful, love the final product there, and people saying it feels like something they feel like they could do. So that's wonderful.
Yes. Yeah, you really can. It's like once you get the muscle memory down, like that wiring thing, it's just anytime you do something for the first time, like think of the first time you like cut an onion and it's just really awkward. And now you're probably just great at it. So it's really just getting that muscle memory down with the wire. And once you get the wire technique, it really can be applied to so much. So I'll be excited for you when you try it out.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Arrin. This has been wonderful. It's so exciting to learn a new skill and get some new inspiration. So thanks so much for sharing some time and your expertise with us today.